What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So in the month plus that we have been patiently awaiting more news for Pokemon Sword and Shield, many of us here on YouTube have been biding our time by talking about things we want to see in the game, things we think we will see in the game, and basically everything in between. Many people have covered their wish list of things they want to see in the game, or maybe they've covered things that we need to see in the game for this title to be successful, but today I am going to cover something similar but different at the same time. Today we are going to be talking about 5 random must-have things for Pokemon Sword and Shield. This is not going to be your typical 100 plus Pokemon, evolutions, returning to Kalos, and things like that. Rather, they're the type of thing that you would consider a little more, well, random. They're not necessarily the marquee thing that you're going to think of as soon as you think of what you want to see in this game, but at the same time, they're very particular things that are basically a no-brainer for this title that if they are not included, are definitely going to be a little bit of a bummer on the entire experience of the game, and I wanted to go ahead and cover these things today. Now, while I guess you could technically call these things my opinion in terms of needing to have them in the game, at the same time as we go through them, I think you guys will very easily see why each and every one of them just have a golden opportunity to appear in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and personally, I can't help but feel that Pokemon Sword and Shield will just be a little less enjoyable if any of these things are not included. So without any further ado, why don't we go ahead and just get right into it. Okay, the first thing on my list of random must-haves is a big one, and that would be the inclusion of bagpipe music. As I'm sure probably all of you already know by now, the Galar region in Pokemon Sword and Shield is based on the UK, and one of the countries in the UK is Scotland, and Scotland is quite literally the home of the bagpipe. The two are practically one and the same, and that is exactly why bagpipe music in Pokemon Sword and Shield is an absolute must-have for these games. It's always a very important thing for every new Pokemon region to stand out culturally from one another, and we know that Game Freak knows this because we've seen them implement very cultural things in recent regions like Alola and Kalos, for instance. And literally the easiest thing, or one of the easiest things you can do to distinguish the Galar region culturally is by including some bagpipe music, which is an absolute icon of a huge part of the UK in Scotland. We have even seen a little bit of Scottish influence in the games already in the outfits of the player characters, so taking it one step further and including bagpipes into the soundtrack of the game would just be an absolute no-brainer. It's a monumentally easy thing for Game Freak to do, and overall I think it would just enhance the experience of the games to the umpteenth degree, at least in my own personal opinion, and if they don't do it given the context of the region and everything, it's going to be a major bummer and a huge missed opportunity, and that is exactly why it's a must-have for Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, this next one I feel like is pretty likely to happen, so it's not something we need to worry about too much, but even still, it is a must-have, and that would be an appearance by Looker and a major plotline at some point throughout the game featuring him as well. The reason why this is so likely is because Looker has appeared in the main series games of every generation in some capacity since he debuted in Pokemon Platinum, so it's very likely just based on that alone that he will appear in Pokemon Sword and Shield as well. However, the reason why it's a must-have is because, in case you didn't know, Looker is literally David Tennant, aka the 10th Doctor, or at least I'm pretty sure it's the 10th Doctor, from Doctor Who, which is a very iconic and classic British TV series. And it's not even that Looker is just based on Doctor Who or anything like that, because if you put them side by side, you can tell that Looker is practically a one-to-one Pokemon recreation of David Tennant's version of the Doctor, and that is why it's such a must-have for Sword and Shield, because it is such an obvious reference and inspiration, and now that we are going to the place where that TV show literally started, it's just an absolute must-have for Looker to not only appear, but to have have some sort of major storyline featuring him either during the main story or in the post-game. It doesn't really matter where in the game this happens, and it's already happened a couple of times for Looker already without this extra bit of reasoning to do so, so I'm sure it will happen, but it is a must-have because of this connection, so it's something we need to see in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and if we don't see it for some weird reason, it will be a huge disappointment. Now, of all of the things on this list, all of which would be pretty easy to implement anyway, this next one is probably the easiest of them all, and that would be including all of the English/British/ Pokemon that have some kind of connection to the UK already in Pokemon Sword and Shield. We're clearly going to be getting brand new Pokemon that will have their own connections to the UK and the Galar region, but I'm talking about older Pokemon from previous generations that already have some type of connection. For example, we've got Pokemon like Rapidash, who is basically a unicorn, and the unicorn is the national animal of Scotland. We've got Lapras, who is based on the Loch Ness Monster, which also comes from Scotland. We've got Snubbull and Granbull, who are based on British Bulldogs. We've got the Lillipup family, who are based on Yorkshire Terriers, and we've even got royal Pokemon, if you will, like Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Slowking, and Vespiquen, all of which would fit exceptionally well in the Galar region, a big portion of which is based on England, which is obviously famous for having a king and queen. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Aegislash here, because obviously Aegislash is a Pokemon based on a Sword and Shield, and these games are literally called Pokemon Sword and Shield, but at the same time, I think that's a little bit of a different case. I think it's kind of a toss-up whether or not this Pokemon gets included just based on the fact that Solrock and Lunatone weren't in Sun and Moon, so if it doesn't get included, I don't think it's as big of a deal because it really doesn't have a connection outside of the name, whereas these Pokemon all have some direct connection to the UK itself, which makes it a little bit more of a priority to include these Pokemon in the game. We already learned from the reveal trailer that there's going to be a number of different Pokemon from past generations in this game, so all of the Pokemon I just mentioned that have that English connection already are an absolute must-have to include as well. The game can still be really good even if they aren't included, but that does not mean that it won't be a little bit of a disappointment at the same time. Okay, so this next one is a bit of a toss-up as to whether or not it will actually happen for reasons I will get into in a second, but I still believe it's an absolute must-have for the simple fact that it is an absolute staple when it comes to the UK, and that would be some pubs or some pub-like locations. Now, obviously, we cannot have regular pubs in Pokemon Sword and Shield because, well, this is a kid's game, but I still do feel like it's worth making some kind of family-friendly equivalent like a juice bar or a cafe or a coffee shop or something along those lines, because there are a ridiculous amount of pubs in the UK, and it would be a crying shame not to have that represented in Pokemon Sword and Shield. To give you guys an idea of just how many pubs are in the UK, let me run some numbers by you really quick. As of 2017, according to Statista.com, there were 48,350 pubs in the UK. For reference, that's almost 2.5 times the total population of the place where I live, which is about 20,000 people, and that is over 3 times the amount of McDonald's restaurants in the US and Canada, which stood at about 15,600 in 2016. And as if that weren't enough, that number is also about 8 times the amount of Walmart stores in the world, which stands at about 6,363 as of 2017. So I mean, if the number of pubs in the UK, which isn't even that big of an area to begin with, literally is more than the populations of some smaller cities and outclasses the number of establishments of 2 of the biggest companies in the world combined, I think it deserves some representation in a Pokemon game. I mean, make it a juice bar, make it a coffee shop, heck, you could go the Sun and Moon route and do kind of like a cafe thing that was included in the Pokemon Center itself. Do whatever you gotta do, Game Freak, to make this family friendly. I won't blame you for that, but I will blame you if you do not include it at all, because the numbers do not lie. This is a ridiculous thing in the UK. It's a very big deal, and it needs to be included in these games in some way, shape, or form. And last but not least, we have a bit of a smaller one, but I do feel like it's really important for giving us the full UK experience, and that would be having British dialect in the game in the form of dialogue and in the form of signage throughout the region. Now, admittedly, I don't really know how this would work for people who are playing the game in the UK, but I really do feel like, at least for everyone outside of the UK, that having some British English in the game is very important. The reason I say this is because, similar to the point about the bagpipes, I think it is really important to establish the culture of the Galar region as different compared to all of the other regions in order for it to stand out. And being based on the UK, it has a lot of really unique culture to take advantage of. The Brits are famous for their dialects, so I think it's an absolute must-have to include this in the game to kind of immerse us in the Galar region overall. So I'm talking about seeing words like bollocks, mate, govna, stuff like that, including an unnecessary amount of U's in every word you can fit it in, like color or rumor, and, most importantly, every time someone is wearing a sweater, it's gotta be called a jumper, no questions asked, or I'm just not gonna buy the game. All jokes aside, however, I really do think that British English needs to be included as a bit of flavor text, if you will, and even though we have seen this in past games, like in X and Y for instance, I feel like they should do it just a little bit more, just for the simple fact that British English compared to like basic English, for instance, is way easier to understand, so it would make more sense to have more of that in the game, as opposed to something like French that is literally a completely different language. So I think it's important to have a little bit of Britishness all throughout the game, and if they can do it right and do it enough, I feel like it will be a cherry on top to an already treat of a game in Pokemon Sword and Shield. And there we have it, everybody. Those were 5 random must-have things for Pokemon Sword and Shield. Even though these were smaller details, it's often the smaller details that can make or break a game. And I feel like if Game Freak takes the time to pay attention to these details and have that attention to detail, it's really going to make the difference in the long run once these games come out. If you guys enjoyed the video though, be sure to give it a like because it really helps out, and let me know in the comments below what you think about the possibility of including these type of things in the game. And if you are new to the channel as well, be sure to subscribe for more new Pokemon content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Also, if you like what you see and you want to further support the channel, consider following me on Spotify and checking out my Pokemon remixes, because not only is Pokemon music awesome, but it's a great way to help support the channel outside of just watching videos, and listening to my stuff there directly supports the channel here, which will allow me to continue to make videos for you guys into the future, which of course is extremely appreciated. Finally, I know I am extremely late on this because I kept forgetting to mention it in an actual video, but I did want to take the time to mention and thank you guys in an actual video for hitting 90,000 subscribers. It's just unbelievable to me that we have actually came this far, and hitting 100,000 subscribers, in case you didn't know, has just been my absolute life's dream the past 6.5 years since I started YouTube, and the fact that we're less than 9,000 away at this point is so surreal and humbling, and I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. It means the world to me, and once we do hit 100K, whenever that does happen, I have got some extremely exciting things to share with you guys, and I can't wait to do so. So just once again, thank you all so much. With all of that being said though, I will be back on Thursday for another video, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you can be notified as soon as it goes live. And until then, as always, you know I love you guys, and I will smell you guys later.